Okay, we're going to jump right into the next panel, which fortuitously is a discussion about ecology, understanding risks in infrastructural ecology. We'd like our panelists to come up. Ellen, Neises, good to see you. From PennDesign, Alexandros Washburn. From Stevens Institute, Alex Felson, who thankfully jumped in and answered a question with us from Yale University, and moderated by Kate Orff from SCAPE and, of course, Columbia. So please come up.
Hi. Our panel is engaging the green stuff, but also just the whole built and natural environment, which is a pretty big topic for one panel. Alexandros is going to introduce us to modeling, and Alex Felson is going to talk a little bit about how to evolve an ecological practice. Kate's going to talk about how to bring a project through to implementation, to really see it through. And I'm going to start by introducing systems thinking. These are all topics that we thought add to what you learn in school about design and how to think about this problem of coastal resilience. These are also skills of design, we would argue, but they may not be ones that you're as aware of in your studio. So we're going to try and quickly fly through these. Systems thinking, as you might imagine, is a hard topic to do in 10 minutes. So You'll have the slides to read, and I'll try to rush through them, just to kind of scope out what a course in systems thinking might be, as we were instructed to do. Systems thinking is really about simplification, not computation. So it's two totally different ways of thinking about what models are. And systems thinking is intended to help us achieve the simplicity needed to make a problem tractable, to make it understandable, and to think about where to intervene. The basic concepts of applied systems theory are probably known to all in some form: parts, connections, functions, and thinking about things like stocks and flows and feedback loops. It gets interesting when you start to really apply this to a complex problem. We're always kind of trying to get down to the bottom here, where we're looking for the systems dynamics that allow us to find the points of greatest leverage. This drawing by Interborough is a way of describing the parts and connections of physical systems that are related to flood ecologies and infrastructure. So this is one way of thinking about systems. This is another. This is actually we can use systems thinking to articulate a thesis. So this is really the thesis that underlies the city of Philadelphia's quite revolutionary plan for distributing management of stormwater, but it's very simple. This is another systems approach to thinking about defining very broad classes of options for increasing coastal resilience. So framing the range of problems as classes helps us get our hands around when you would employ one class or another. We can also think about systems as a way to look for and apply general principles for resilience design of complex systems and environments. So this is a kind of generalist strategy from borrowing from other domains and bringing them to the domain of resilience. We can use systems thinking to look at all the connections between cities, regions, and in this case, you can see that failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation ranks as the very highest impact among in the belief of world leaders that are part of the Economic Forum. And we can also think about how incredibly implicated that green diamond of failure to adapt is with all our other urban systems. So it helps to think from the local scale, from the Interborough drawing and trying to understand the context for a physical design project, to this much larger kind of framework for thinking about things globally. This is arguably the most comprehensive, well thought out, thoroughly researched plan that we have in the region. It's based on a lot of systems thinking about coastal protection. But at the same time, despite the intelligence of that plan, some systems thinkers, including the ones who were involved in articulating that plan, will also recognize all these other things that stand in the way of implementation. So there are huge people problems, huge institutional problems, and it's a very coarse grain. We're not even getting down to the grain of community, which is probably the best place to articulate a common project. So all of that leads us to, a clear understanding that deep systems thinking is necessary to design good infrastructure in this area. But we could use it the way the military does, and I think this is a pretty amazing map of counterinsurgency dynamics in Afghanistan. And if we thought this way, you can see that infrastructure is just a tiny thing over there in the bottom right corner, and everything else, including beliefs and all that, that is the domain for thinking about attacking, where to attack in this huge, complex problem. And it's pretty fascinating that the military, which we kind of think is focused so much on hard targets, is actually spending so much more time thinking about the human context and all of these feedback loops and delays and ways of imagining it than we ever do. So I think there's a lot to this. And for me, the most useful thing, if you're going to look at anything in systems theory, is this list from Donella Meadows' Thinking in Systems. She rank orders in order of degree of leverage, potential for leverage, all of the moments of, or locuses of action in any kind of problem. And you can see that we start with numbers and buffers and at one end, the low leverage ways of approaching problems, and you work your way up to changing who participates, the goals, the purpose, the function, and the paradigms and mindsets at the extreme of high leverage. And what's really interesting for us in design schools is that we spend all our time thinking about number 10. And she argues that, physical systems are very, very hard to change. And so don't spend all your time down there, because actually thinking about these things up in 1, 2, 3, and 4 are actually the best ways to affect number 10. So I think that's, there's a lot in this to follow up on. There are many people, who, the reason why those 1, 2, 3, and 4 are really important is because a lot of problems that seem intractable, as Bill Joy and Amory Lovins would say, it's because they lack a big enough design space to create the necessary degrees of freedom to solve the problem. And so a lot of schools of thought are interested in not just reducing the probability of a big event or reducing the magnitude of that big event, but creating upside, increasing the probability of upside, of learning and of evolution. And there's no time for this, but that idea appears in complex adaptive systems. It applies in C.S. Holling's theory of emergent succession, which landscape architects and ecologists love. It appears in Nassim Taleb's theories of anti-fragility and post-traumatic growth. So it appears in many, many different ways of framing this, the idea of moving away from risk management and moving to upside creation. And all of those schools of thought agree that there's so much to be gained in terms of quality, vitality, resilience, or anti-fragility of ecosystems and individuals if we don't try and over-control for risk and we reduce and try to reduce all the variability. So we want to design for something that is a lot more like the way nature solves problems. And I like this term optionality. Nassim Taleb talks about how it's a great replacement for intelligence. You don't have to know everything if you have a lot of horses in the race. And this leads us to really think hard about the idea of prototyping as an approach to design. Hank Oving talked to me about this 4 years ago. I read it in Judith Rodin's book. I've seen it in a lot of places. But systems thinking really helps you get it in your bones why prototyping, and why we're going to spend a lot of time tomorrow talking about prototyping, why that is a good strategy in this realm, and why we need a whole lot more small examples in order to evolve to a better way of doing and thinking about coastal resilience. The good thing is that designers, like system thinkers, are generalists and we're integrators. Richard Buchanan, who writes about wicked problems in design, says that we are very good at mining the particular, at making exchanges between domains, at thinking about new placements, and at creating integrated solutions. What he argues we are not very good at is that we don't really have the right constitution for wicked systems problem, or we do have the right constitution, sorry, for wicked systems problems. We like things that are ill-defined. We like the challenge of combining from different domains, but we don't have the patience or the know-how to master the science or to shepherd projects through what Michael Berkowitz from 100 Resilient Cities calls the valley of death. Love that expression. And we also, you know, the government agencies that are working on and financing most big risk problems don't really have an idea what design can bring to the table in this world where we're focused on reducing variability and sure things and precedents. And we lack power in the current institutional arrangements. And those two subjects, 1 and 2, are the things that my colleagues are going to really talk about in their presentation. How can we attack those two things? I'm going to leave you with one example of changing the model of the system, thinking about how the parameters that we're trying to optimize, or that people generally think we are trying to optimize, are not yet defined. And so there's a moment now to really define those. My colleague Mark Hughes, on whom I rely for many of these ideas, talks about how you can enumerate the risk domains and then transform them into negotiation domains or into design domains. And you can apply design as a form of negotiation. And I think that's really what we tried to do with the Hunts Point Lifelines project. We tried to negotiate the real circumstances and needs of a working waterfront and all the businesses there, and also the real players and strengths and capacities and frictions between those different groups, to integrate those in a design that actually pulls everyone together in a shared vision and coalition around solving the problem. The idea of the Levee Lab was really to work on applied materials science and engage all of the capacity in that community to try to solve the problem of the regulations for the working waterfront, which are not yet attuned to solving the problem of coastal resilience. And the livelihoods idea was about recognizing, as many people in Hunts Point told us, that in a poor community, jobs are the most important piece of resilience infrastructure that there could ever possibly be. So thinking about how the community can participate economically and intellectually in the construction of its own protection is really essential as we think about how you could work on a scale that means we could have protection for everybody. We did, as Bill Joy suggested, we enlarged the space. We came up with a new system that doesn't have anything to do, that doesn't exist yet, and proposed that it have an anchor in Hunts Point as a way to bring more investment there. And we tried to integrate all of these things in a model of not just coastal resilience, but a kind of beautiful working model of social, economic, and ecological resilience that was about collective provision by not just government, but also by the businesses, the Teamsters, and the community, collective provision of this different model of approaching the resilience problem. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Alex Washburn. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm an architect, a designer. I was chief urban designer for New York City under Mayor Bloomberg for many years. And I am here because my house got flooded in Sandy. I live in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and that's a picture of me opening the door to Hurricane Sandy on the night of October 29th. I defied the evacuation order. Being a designer, being interested in coastlines, I wanted to feel what a storm surge was like. I wanted to see what it does actually to neighborhoods like mine, beautiful neighborhoods on the water, 19th century neighborhoods, unreinforced masonry, neighborhoods of great community, of great diversity, and a place that people really love. And it was sobering, sort of beautiful when the late leaves of autumn came in. But of course, the electrical panels were in the basement, and immediately, boom, the lights go out after this. The lights go out in my neighborhood. The lights go out in Manhattan. And there's this eerie brownness. And you are like standing like on a boulder in a river. The rapidity, the strength, the scale of the waters coming into a city, a neighborhood, a community. The scale is simply awesome. And afterwards, in the months after Sandy, when at the Department of City Planning and other city departments, we were scrambling to find what the right response was, I felt a need. I felt that we were great people, and this was a great administration, but we didn't have data. We could say something was good, but we couldn't say if something was better than another option. So I decided I needed to go someplace where we could get better data. And for that, I went to the Stevens Institute of Technology, right across the river in Hoboken, right across from the New Whitney is where we are. And I started something called CRUX, the Center for Coastal Resilience and Urban Excellence. And the goal was to try to solve our technical problems related to climate change and storm surge and coastal communities, but also to improve quality of life. And we felt there were three essential topics that you needed to bring together. You needed to understand the force of the water, so you needed hydrodynamics. And luckily, Stevens, as you're going to hear later from my colleague Alan Blumberg, is really the world leader in understanding how water moves in New York Harbor. And we have a wonderful website where you can see this as an animation in real time. The velocity of the water, the salinity, the temperature, the wave heights. See us breathe as an aquatic ecosystem. The second is urban design, to understand the force of the city. And that's what I was bringing to the table. Having worked so long in New York City, understanding the social, the political, the financial aspects that lets change happen. But this is a very complex topic, so we needed a framework to keep it in mind. And that's why the third necessary ingredient is complex systems, modeling complexity and measuring the results. There's several scalar rules in complexity that have bedeviled architects and designers since day one. They have to be studied. Scalar asymmetry, solutions at one scale often have the opposite effect at a larger scale. It's very hard for us as designers to judge our next move, our next line on paper, unless we have an understanding of how each of those repercuss into the larger system. So I hope we bring these things together. And so I want to talk about the modeling that is an essential component of this. Okay, first of all is fluid modeling. You've got to know how the water is moving. And so Alan and his team do something called forcing. They're able to take an ocean model, in this case the Stevens North Atlantic model, and through a chain of computations, force it down to a smaller scale into NIHOPS, the New York Harbor Ocean Predictive System. They've made huge strides. They've gotten now to the point where we're at a 3-meter resolution. This is extraordinary for urban oceanography. But it's almost to the point where we can get to the resolution that we can understand the interaction of water with building. I want to get to 30-centimeter resolution so I can see what happens when water hits a doorway, a window. Now, the other side of that equation is the physical modeling. And Hugh Lester is here, one of my colleagues, a PhD student from Stevens, who helped us build this virtual Hoboken model, digital Hoboken model. That's not a photograph. That's actually a computer model based on LiDAR scans of Hoboken, which is an ideal test bed because it's only a mile across and we have one of everything. This brings up the question of modeling space. I like the term ontology that is often used to describe this. How do you represent reality? and systems engineers go to great lengths to try to develop analogs to represent reality as a modeling system, to create an ontology. And I'm sitting there in the room, an architect, an urban designer, and telling them, it's not that complicated. Make a model of the city. The city itself is the ontology you are looking for. What we're trying to get is a representational space in between fluid dynamics and solid modeling, able to take data from both those domains and give it a common area for representation. And the next step, bring in real-time data through sensing systems. So we do this project called Virtual Hoboken, where you can see in this image, it's the physical model of Hoboken that is being hit by the physics model of the water in New York Harbor and flooded. So terrain plus physics gives you an understanding of the result. Here in specific is what we're doing. 2 years ago, Hugh built above ground. Last year, we built below ground. This is Professor Pijobe, who is a sewer expert. And we were going to try to build the sewer system of Hoboken in the model, and then link it to a larger system of data, both from our sensors in the water and new sensors we're putting up above ground, plus with sensors that we're trying to develop to go through the sewer system to understand its capacity for performance. We call those sewer bots, and then integrate that into a larger system that then makes the data public and brings in both government agencies, but also something you could have on your app to understand the hydrology. What happens when it rains? Why is it flooding in strange places? So all the technical aspects that you have to do in this sort of a project, the architecture students that it's required to model and build three-dimensional models of this, come together in this ontology. And this is our immersion lab. And again, that's our model of Hoboken being flooded under a certain scenario. So what does this mean for designers? Why am I, a designer, spending all this time with my friends, the engineers at Stevens? This is a very complicated thing to do that takes a long time. But the point is that it's going to give us a tool as designers. If we can get it to work, it's going to give us a tool to design individual projects and then in real time see their effect on the overall system, whether that's the hydro system, whether that's a transportation system, whether that's a social system. This gives us a design tool to bring into real time what in the real world we struggled with in the months-long process of the environmental impact statement, something that comes at the end of the process. Well, now we want to bring this into the beginning of the process and make it a design tool. So we can stay away from that. That's what's being built in Japan right now. We don't want that. Maybe this Great Wall of Japan will solve the technical problem facing it of tsunami surge, but it certainly will not improve quality of life. I'm hoping that as designers we can get to something that will allow us to build what we believe is beautiful, but know that it's effective in the system. And to do that, we need the modeling, and we need the resources of young people willing to enter that world, to grapple with its difficulties, but always maintain a goal of making our quality of life, whether it's through beauty or other measures, putting that first and making sure we reach that goal. So thank you.
All right, so I'm Alex Felson from Yale University. Thanks so much for inviting us. Is this doing its own? And I just want to say that there are so far great talks, a lot of overlap in interesting ways, and I'm going to try to point to some of this. But you know, it's a new day for urban planning in light of the need for new risk management considerations to be integrated and reconciled across multiple sectors of local economies. This is a quote from the Risk and Resilience in Coastal Regions document. And it's a really interesting time now for designers to play a critical role in rethinking the way in which these large and complex challenges can be addressed at the site level and at the city level. At the same time, it's also a challenging stage, I think, for designers. And what it's doing is expanding the role and leading to a reallocation of risks and responsibilities which kind of exposed planners and designers to new concerns and issues. And so I think the interesting thing about the Rebuild by Design program is that it both catalyzed the discussion and positioned designers in a creative and proactive leadership role to influence this kind of to influence decision making, but it also put designers in a very tenuous position, because they're then taking on some of the engineering challenges associated with dealing with coastal risk and coastal adaptation. And you can see with Co-op City, for example, there's a lot of challenges, local challenges, when you're thinking about how to modify and manage these ecosystems. There's a growing call to provide resilience-based strategies to the increasing challenges in environmental risks that we face with climate change. And when you look at Wagner and Ball's sketch with Resilient Bridgeport, defining 3 different types of water: the watershed, the urban city water and impervious surfaces dealing with stormwater, and the coastal water. You can think about, these are just 3 aspects of water systems in urban cities that we're trying to address and deal with. And it's a level of complexity and concern in terms of how to manage, modify, and design for these kinds of risks. So going back to, I think, what Alex was showing before, which is a great frame for this kind of agenda. There are a set of dialogues and discussions that need to be fostered in order to try to address some of these complex systems. There's opportunities and exciting ways in which we can develop stormwater chains and treatment chains where we're dealing with ecological solutions on the city side that also can function for coastal adaptation risks and for drainage. And when you think about the kind of the zone of risk and the areas where FEMA is emphasizing work, and look at projects like the Meadowlands project or other projects where designers are seeking to leverage these cross-scale dynamics, for example, to the relationships with buildings, flooding, and storm events in the coastal land-water transition zones, that these are really big opportunities to develop a wide range of management strategies. So it's really, I think, a renaissance in terms of the designer's role in creatively developing strategies that can support this kind of risk. At the same time, as I was saying earlier, the risk is great and the solutions are not always clear. And I think designers tend to be optimists and try to look for solutions that are proactive and look at the glass half full. And I think that it's necessary in some ways to recognize that we're also adopting or taking on what's not really our risk, but actually a societal risk associated with storm events and sea level rise directly. So here's a project that I worked on in Seaside Village in Bridgeport, and you can see from the example here on the left that these guys have a real issue. Here's Sandy on the right, where there was a flooding concern. It's located in Bridgeport here in the 100-year floodplain. And when you look at Bridgeport as an example of a post-industrial city and the kind of risks and concerns that it might face over the next 50 to 80 years, it's a fairly limited scale in terms of the size, and look at all the area that's essentially potentially floodable. So there's opportunity to take on these kind of multi-layered strategies to address not only coastal risk, but also to think about this funding opportunity and this innovative stage as an opportunity for multiple solutions or multiple creative innovations. So Seaside Village has the value of property is even lower than the rest of Bridgeport. It is a historic village, so it has some identity, but it's also low to moderate income housing in this location. And the question is, what can they do? What opportunities are there? We built this bioretention garden system that was designed here to drain their parking lot. It's a low-lying flood zone, so no engineer, at least in the past, was going to suggest developing green infrastructure in this location because essentially, from the engineering perspective, it's a high-risk project that's going to fail. And by fail, I mean it's not going to drain within the 72 hours required for green infrastructure to function and perform. So, of course, you get a landscape architect to come in and develop this innovative idea, which, in fact, took a whole lot of work days where we rented a pump and drained the location because it flooded repeatedly. There was a very complicated negotiation process with the community. Some of my students are in class today, and they met with Lydia, who was really one of the instigators of this program or this effort. she's been literally up and down, knocked off the board, removed from this and that. Rebuild by Design was a huge blessing, I think, for this community because it uplifted what was otherwise a project that was, a real challenge and was seen as with mixed opinions. But we also used it as an education opportunity. So we designed the project as a research project where we installed these 6 bioretention swales and modified organic matter and sand content so we could look at water infiltration capacity, looking specifically at coastal green infrastructure, which, by the way, does need to be studied and evaluated, even though engineers sort of slow to come to this. We need more water management strategies in our coastal zones. We need to develop knowledge and understanding about how these systems work. And modeling analysis is a critical tool to interpret these kinds of ecosystem functions. But modeling analysis also is taking data in, the data and knowledge that you have that you're entering into that model to understand what's going on. We're still at a stage, particularly with urban ecology, where we're trying to gather data and information so that we can understand how these constructed ecosystems that we're building are functioning and working over time. So there's a combination of modeling and analysis that's in this collaborative work with researchers who are able to quantify these dynamics, as well as field experiments where we can test and evaluate the performance. And what I'm proposing is a collaborative role between researcher and field experiments and designers in public space design so that you can develop this kind of boundary object tool, which allowed me to bring groups of kids that live in Bridgeport out repeatedly so that they could both construct and work on this system, but also understand what flooding means, what a bioretention garden is, what the value of designing a green infrastructure treatment chain in the near term that functions for drainage, that in the long term becomes a marsh migration network as sea level rises. So my argument for the value of this sometimes to the community boiled down to, well, it drains your parking lot, so you at least get 15 parking stalls, which in fact was the main reason why it was supported for quite some time, almost 3 years. But but to the fact that in the long term it's going to become you're actually constructing habitat. You're preparing the landscape so that it's green infrastructure periodically. Other times it's functioning as habitat. So to move forward, this question of managing complexity and addressing multiple systems is an opportunity and an issue, I think, for the design community. When you think about combined sewer outflows in urban systems, there is an opportunity to think about how to redesign the urban fabric, not just for coastal adaptation, but to try to address some of the nutrient influx into Long Island Sound that's creating hypoxia and cause really the downfall of fisheries, or to think about removal of dam systems so that you can activate the habitat upstream which fish are not able to access. So this idea of thinking more broadly about the opportunity for this land-water zone as a creative and constructed ecological area that designers can work in both for coastal adaptation, but also to improve ecosystem function. So there's a need in the sciences to update the application of scientific understanding. Like many of the firm maps provided by FEMA are based on 20-year-old data rather than newer data, and this graph was shown earlier, but the idea is that things are changing over time. So, and not only that, but the city itself has been evolving over time from a water supply city to a sewer city to a drain city. And so the city system itself, in terms of how we construct it, is evolving. And so within this concept, we've already mentioned panarchy and the importance of this idea of nested cycles. People discuss wicked problems and start thinking about where designers can work. I target planning stages and site scale, so that we're building things but also planning as 2 areas that designers can perform. And then it's not just the best available science, and I think this is one of the flaws that I see again and again when people are talking about what we need. More of the science, let's get more science directed into this. It's really thinking about what science do we need to know in order to inform decisions, and we need to create and generate new science and information. And so the opportunity, for example, the coastal resilience tool that the TNC developed is a great tool, and I've used it in multiple projects, including the Guilford Coastal Resilience Plan that I developed, but it's a tool that doesn't include inland flooding. And it doesn't include certain issues that I think are critical. So the designer is now in a role where not only do they have to use scientific information, but they have to know what the underlying assumptions are and what the missing information is and how to frame the tool itself to communicate it to the public and to interpret its influence on their own design strategies. So building on that, rather than designers sort of waiting to get the results from ecologists understanding ecosystems and doing their research and coming up with results, I push for designers to really work with ecologists and collaborate on the research in urban ecosystems to start to understand how to frame the role that ecologists are playing to define relevant research that can drive decision making, and also to get involved in defining the direction of research over time. And I'll just end by saying that, that I think that there's an important thing with Rebuild by Design where it raised and elevated the role that designers are playing. I think a value that RBD could play for this group is to think about what the responsibilities of the client and the designer and the overall, those of us that are practicing these efforts now, how can we make sure that our professional practice and our ability to move forward creatively isn't impinged by potential risk and let's say getting sued or getting into trouble in other ways. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that flip into the legal and liability risk for practicing designers as we begin to build these projects. That is largely the topic of my remarks today. I felt like I could be most useful in trying to give you essentially notes from the field relative to the Living Breakwaters project, which is now on the boards and running. So first to start with a statement that, as we've discussed today, these complex eco-infrastructural projects involve both ecological systems and change over time, that these changes and systems span regulatory agencies, political boundaries, levels of governance from local, borough, city, state, federal agencies. And they also span a gradient, in most cases, of land and water. Of course, this is not a bounded property line, but rather we are now all together working in a sort of a more infrastructural space, in the space of water in public spaces or in the commons. So these projects are, by factors of, by exponential factors, very, very, frankly, challenging and difficult to realize. So I'm going to talk very quickly about the Living Breakwaters project and the challenges and opportunities that these projects face when they move beyond the competition phase, what Harvey kind of called, I think, a technological dreamscape, into the world of funding, permitting, and regulatory approvals. So I'm going to hit some broad points, but basically, where we are now with this project, it now has a schedule that would crash anyone's Microsoft project software program with multiple stakeholders. But I thought to kind of show you where the rubber's hitting the road a little bit. It was funded with $60 million of CDBG DR funds through the rebuild process and is implemented by the New York State Governor's Office of Storm Recovery and an amazing and dedicated team there. Briefly, the project is a roughly 2-mile-long engineered necklace of breakwaters in Raritan Bay. The micro and macro form of the breakwater itself basically serves to attenuate waves and replenish fish habitat. It serves as a sort of a substrate for shellfish. It is seeded with oysters and connects residents and students to the shore line via the Billion Oysters Project and their DOE-certified science curriculum. There's also a series of water hubs that host wet labs, kayaks, storages, etc. But it was conceived as a joint physical and social project to help protect Staten Island from future storms, reduce risk by attenuating waves, and to replenish this eroding shoreline. Importantly, it aims to increase the perception of risk by not blocking views to the water, certainly not in the form of the Japanese seawall that Alexandros showed. But basically, our goal was that the physical infrastructure itself becomes a platform for organizing onshore social life and vice versa. But while the project bridges the social and spatial concepts of infrastructure, it means that there is an incredibly complex series of relationships that must be navigated and interwoven in order for the three components to persist. SCAPE is prime on the project and essentially serving as these arrows, as a connective and integrating force that is managing the design and engineering process forward. And Gozer themselves, to their tremendous credit, they are equally dedicated to advancing all three components of the projects. But if these logos represent all the people and individuals have to get along and facilitate the path. If one group lags, for example, if there's a delay to get a permit to access DPR land to conduct a beach or a dune survey, then the entire delicate ecology of the approvals and scheduling process is jeopardized. So if there's one lesson about this slide, it's that we all have to believe in the vision and get along. And this next series of slides points to other challenges and hopefully opportunities beyond the administrative and managerial to complex infrastructural ecology works. For example, data is a major challenge. Environmental and ecological data of the kind needed to submit the kind of gold standard of regulatory review does not exist, frankly, in many cases. It is this gray space here, and information below the waterline is often not known. So, and this data is incredibly expensive and time-consuming to procure. We probably all remember the Westway, certainly the lawyers in the room, project where the construction of the West Side Highway was blocked in federal district court due to disruption of striped bass habitat. So this precedent still inflects upon infrastructural today. But when you're trying to regenerate degraded habitat, you have to kind of move beyond this sort of baseline data condition, because we want to advance a new kind of way that is a projective way of how we can monitor and understand how new habitats are created, not just protecting existing habitats. So on the right, you can see, on the left, you can see a sort of beach profile transect study being performed just some months ago, and on the right, an adjacent artificial habitat survey performed by scuba divers. So this, on the right, represents a unique effort on behalf of our team to go above and beyond the data sets needed to simply construct the project. Things like geotechnical, for example, because we want to understand what are its long-term, not only ecological impacts, but what are its benefits? How can we expect to grow this new ecology, and how can we measure it? But as Gozer can attest to, it is expensive and time-consuming and eats into the total project cost. Also, to advance the sort of environmental projects of this scale and go beyond baseline data, and specifically in the case of our project, to assess oyster suitability and spat settlement, we're now looking at water quality data and local wave climate at a very, very fine granular level of detail. So these are being, this is being studied by the careful placement of ADCPs, which is an acoustic Doppler current profiler. And here you can see in this video them being placed in Raritan Bay. So, you know, again, in these complex ecological projects, it is the task of the owner and the implementer to move above and beyond the lowest common denominator, again, threatening schedule and budget. We also go above and beyond in this project by constructing our own data sets via interviews and mapping. So here you can see folks from the SCAPE office mapping hard clam abundance with people who know best where they are, actual clammers. So in a kind of a funny inversion, we ended up giving this map to the New York State DEC. So another challenge is simply the regulatory process itself in all its complexity. This is just a snapshot of how different jurisdictions regulate differently. You can see the New York, New Jersey state borderline. And here, you know, even though the water is, for the most part, the same on both sides, it is regulated and conceived differently by two different states. So simply put, regulatory agencies have very different priorities, and it is our task on the project to navigate and to interpret and to explain and pull together, nest these different priorities. So here you can see on the left a sort of a map of fisheries, which might be the most important aspect to Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and on the right, just a NOAA chart. And so, of course, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, their priority is to maintain these navigable channels for oil tankers, et cetera. So this drawing shows the multiple transects that we're now cutting that go above and beyond to project sediment pattern and sand movement, so we can really track how the shoreline is being replenished over time. But it's an incredible amount and a heavy lift. I would say a challenge and an opportunity, which I think also Alexandros spoke to, within what I would call an incredibly compressed schedule is an iterative design process that streamlines engineering and design discussion. So what you're looking at now is a Grasshopper model that we use in meetings with our engineers to quickly adjust and test the spatial extents of these structures, understand how they look in perspective by modifying different attributes. You can see width, location, et cetera. And what I think is a very exciting development too is that we are integrating this 3D spatial model into a physics model, into a RefDiff model. So we can also see in this one on the right, so you can see, and this is the role of designers, you can see, you can visualize, you can modify physical parameters, and then these parameters can be tested in real time relative to terrain and how they react in the physical environment to wave models. So I just wanted to sort of just explain too, relative to data, that extant data is often less detailed than the high resolution modeling programs that exist themselves. So here on the right, a snapshot into the grid size resolution that we're using, a very fine wave RefDiff and SWAN model. And so, but we didn't have data points that actually would help feed into this program itself. So we are paying to get new data to feed it into this model. And so finally, to sort of advance projects, it's really important to experiment with outreach. And then here you can see that Grasshopper model that translates into an interactive sort of screen that we've been using at our community meetings. So it's all connected. A major challenge is also living systems, right? The three of us we're all talking about living, growing systems. And so with oyster suitability, it's incredibly difficult. These living systems are regulated differently. But finally, I'll close on a couple of notes about the legal and community process. Because it is a challenge and to advance, and I would say it is very important sorry, to advance in parallel two separate processes, two separate streams of processes. On the left, you can see the environmental impact statement and NEPA process, a very rational legal process. And on the right, not an irrational process, but certainly one that is characterized by a different sort of part of the human brain, one which has to do with inspiration, enthusiasm. And so these projects truly define the need to couple activist and inspirational community-driven processes with the legal context. It also requires multiple levels of government. In our case, our RBD grantee is the state of New York, and our site is the borough of Staten Island. There's the borough president on the left. But coalition is required, not only from a funding, but from an implementation standpoint. So it is important to bring people around the table together. This is a sort of kind of form of the project itself, serving as a tool for grassroots organizing, a tool for outreach, tool for education. And, but basically, you know, I want to just kind of close by saying that you really have to build a true constituency and be honest about the strengths, the limitations, the gaps, the potential pitfalls, and literally show people what they will see and how these kind of ecological infrastructures will become part of their lives. So I hope these notes from the field on the ground have been useful. And ideally, all this hard work is not in vain. And the idea is really that we're trying to chart a regulatory path forward so that these kinds of projects in the future can be replicated. And hopefully the living breakwaters kind of serves as a bridging concept to get us toward an environment where we are producing less carbon dioxide emissions. I hope I've also kind of clearly advocated for the role of design in balancing the needs for multiple parties, species, interests to come together. And while critical for concept, we found that a design attitude and design thinking is even more critical and difficult in the implementation phase. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to invite our panelists to come up to the table, and we'll have some questions from me and from the audience. Thank you. So I know, just looking around the room, I know we have some world-renowned ecologists in the room, and I thought that the last panel had quite a few ecology questions, so maybe we should actually ask for some history of resiliency or sociology questions. But I guess one thing I wanted to just start, and then we'll open it up, please use the microphones and stand, is a little bit of Klaus's provocation on this, you know, the images of the Aral Sea with the sort of, you know, boats, or the Black Sea and the inundation there, and kind of connect it to, Alex, to something that you mentioned that had to do with, you know, just risk in general and the sort of current status of our ecological systems. Because I think very often as designers, we do take an optimistic approach that we can bring these things together, but I also want to just also state that I feel like we are also operating at a very degraded, almost baseline condition. I don't know, could you talk a little bit more about your remarks about?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that 10 minutes was hard to get everything in. But I think that this idea of, I think that the urbanization of the coastline has created a situation where it's hard to assume that restoration is a solution, so that you can restore and get back the kind of ecosystems that were once in these locations. And I think there is a lot of room for creative thinking about constructing ecosystems in these highly modified zones. I think that it's important to partner, and I think the earlier question from Jody, and I can't remember your last name, Jody, but this question about making sure that there's perspective and knowledge, and that you know, thinking about the historic reference as a guide to inform constructed ecosystems, that is a component, and it's an important one. Thinking about the biological processes, the species dynamics, and the kind of the underlying ecological knowledge that's out there, and how that can be translated into creative strategies that take into account the construction industry, the social interest, the aesthetic, and other aspects of these urbanized coastlines is critical. So I think there's a huge opportunity for designers to get heavily involved in rethinking urban ecosystems. I think it's just important also to note that there's going to be failure, and that failure is something that's you know, every designer wants their project to succeed, and you know, wants something to last. But these are complicated zones and conditions, and they're dynamic, and they're going through changes, and all of that has to be taken into account. And I think educating the public so that there's a recognition that these things are pilots and tests, and that that failure is not failure in one case is not failure everywhere. It's actually a way in which we're collectively learning on how to move forward.
Did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I wanted to add, Kate, and it's brilliant what you're doing with getting implemented these amazing changes, and I think it's maybe it's a question for you. The Achilles heel of resilience is environmental law. We're operating under a system that was conceived at the tail end of the 60s, implemented in the early part of the 70s, when nature was seen as something to be protected from us. NEPA, all the backdrop of all of these is to keep us from harming nature. Well, now we know that nature also has some pretty strong cards to play. So a logical reaction would be to get into a managed relationship where we protect nature from some of our excesses, we seek to protect ourselves from what we might see as some of nature's powers. Exactly what you're doing. But to get approval for these things, especially in terms of building offshore, it's an uphill, hopefully a winnable but uphill battle, but maybe not, because we have to modify the underlying federal laws that are going exactly against the grain of every single thing we are thinking about here. And it's a huge problem, and I have no idea how to approach it, especially in a political context as caricaturish and divisive as currently exists in Washington.
You know, Daniel Kahneman talks about biases that humans have in thinking about risk. And one of the things that he talks about is how we regret our failures to a much, much greater degree than we relish our successes. And that there's a huge bias toward risk aversion. And, you know, the regulations really make that impediment very, very deep. And I think it's sort of, there will be a tipping point where we will have to start looking toward what we can create, the new ecologies, all the things that
That's
you
us
all
as
have been
optimists.
talking about. But trying to change that bias is sort of a deep thing that might actually change the way the sort of in the systems framework of thinking. If we can change that bias, then we might be able to change the physical systems.
I want to ask the students to prepare questions. I noticed in the last panel, too, we had a lot of professionals, but I would like to encourage the students to ask questions. I know we have a microphone, and maybe while we're getting that ready, I have a quick one on just if the panel or someone could speak about just this word risk in general as a framing concept. Because I also feel like in terms of sociology, some of the things that Eric was speaking about, you know, social infrastructure, how people perceive information, is risk a useful framework when thinking about systems thinking or these kinds of issues or resilience? Alex?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. The risk equation, in my course, that's day one. What's the worst that can happen? How you understand the math of the risk equation. Remember, the basic, who has more risk from a hurricane, New Orleans or New York? Who believes in New Orleans? How many in New York? Okay, well, not everybody voted, but those who voted for New York are right because it's probability times consequences. We have a much lower probability of a hurricane strike, but a much higher consequence because we're a much larger city. That's the simple math. If you want to reduce risk, you reduce either of the two factors, probability or consequences. We talked earlier in one of the presentations about reducing carbon. Eric, you were talking about that. That reduces the probability by taking energy out of the system. But there may be already so much energy in the system that the only factor we can now work on is consequences, and that's adaptation to reduce that. Mm-hmm. So I think putting it in terms of the risk equation is a wonderful way of abstracting the problem, getting away from the politics, and putting it into a framework that lets you have a measured conversation between mitigation, adaptation, moving, staying put, amounts you're going to invest socially, financially, politically.
Yeah. All right. Is there a question from the audience? Sorry.
It's too hard in this chair to stand up. But my name is Mike Menz, and I'm a student at CCNY. And Alex knows that probably the question I'm going to ask, since I asked him yesterday. And it is, don't we have a responsibility, really, isn't it a design question about where those boundaries are, about how dangerous some of these projects might be? And I ask specifically about the walls in various places, or the U, and in fact, thinking about a portion of the U being built. I'm not a hydrologist, but it seems to me that the neighbors of the little section of the U should be really scared. And I'm just not sure why we're pushing ahead without that information, without knowing what those walls will do to their neighbors.
Okay, well, I would just say that, you know, we're always making decisions with incomplete information, and we always will be. I think that that's one of the challenges I've found with trying to position ecologists in a role of shaping. There's been an interest within the ecological society to shift from studying to shaping, but there's a real reluctance to kind of jump in the pool and shape, which is ironic for a group of designers who essentially that's what we do. I think you've got to make decisions, you've got to take action, and you've got to, there's a trial and error. I think with Manhattan, obviously, when you're getting involved in proposing walls in Manhattan, that's a pretty big, sandbox to be playing in with a lot of potentially serious implications. So that's one of the issues, I think, with this high-risk area of opportunity and investigation is selecting sites where you're working and the implications of the actions in those sites. So I think one of the great things about SCAPE's work right now is that they're in a location where if failure occurs, I don't think there's going to be that much, I think there might be a lot of frustration from a budget and timeline, and people will probably be upset, but it's also, you're not talking about Lower Manhattan where there's risks in terms of, where there's a lot of investment. So the question, I think to address that question, I think it's valid to investigate options as best we can and to try to interpret and understand the risks that we face. But I also think it's essential to try to figure out ways to move forward.
Or is there another question? Or, just let me. Who has the microphone? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Paul Willard. I'm an architect in the city, and I have a question for Alex. You showed at the very end of your presentation the rather frightening photograph of the wall in Japan, and you kind of dismissed it and said, it may stop a tsunami, but as if that wasn't a valid reason for such a wall. And obviously, it's not the right solution for Hoboken, but I think walls do have a place in when you're confronting a direct ocean where you have had severe damage in the tens of thousands of people. So I'm just suggesting that that wall didn't deserve what I interpreted as a dismissal.
I think it was worse than a dismissal. It was an attack by me on this wall. This wall represents everything that I think as a society we can do wrong, which is to simply abandon our larger goals to an optimized, engineered solution, out of context socially, and only potentially effective in its engineering purpose. What I proposed in showing the next example, which was from Copenhagen and an idea of sketches of polders around Red Hook, this idea that yes, we need a seawall, but does that seawall need to be on the land, made out of concrete, or could it be more like Kate's breakwaters? In some cases, the breakwaters will have to be continuous and therefore form a polder. But that height, those perspective studies she was doing were brilliant because they show exactly how we can use design to achieve engineering ends, but to do it in a way that makes it societally better. That for the 99 years out of 100 that we don't need the engineering side of this to work, that we can get a societal, community, personal, human benefit out of what we will spend enormous amounts of toil, capital, and ingenuity on fashioning. These places define us. I don't want to be defined as a concrete wall. I don't want our city to be thought of as a wall, as a place to hide behind. We're a society that engages, that moves forward, that takes on the biggest problems, but does them on our terms, and if we're successful.
I think it's pretty interesting that your proposal said very clearly, we're not going to stop flooding. And the strategy of the living breakwaters is so that you actually perceive risk. And to be very clear that it doesn't solve, 10 different risk-related problems, and it actually heightens your perception of risk as a strategy is, it's pretty cool that that got $60 million. And I think that there is a real danger to framing everything in terms of risk. So the idea of the complex adaptive systems and the idea that we need risk, that risk is essential, and we're kind of comfortable with it in other areas. In investment, people think about, if I can eat, if I want to sleep well, if I want to not lose any money, then I'm not going to get very high returns on, where risk is low. And if I want to make a lot of money, if I want to eat well, I have to put my money on risky bets. And that the diversity of bets that we make is the only way that we can generate enough information. And so I do think, the focus on risk can lead us down some very bad engineering-led, unenlightened, undesigned rabbit holes of modeling to bad ends. And there are people who are doing it in a very sophisticated way toward good ends, but we as designers have to struggle hard to find a way to maintain control over that process and to keep it integrated with design instead of to lose our power in the focus on reducing all risk to nothing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that speaks to Alex's earlier remarks too about designers kind of taking on too much, and much of what we were trying to do was kind of saying by pairing the breakwater with the dune, you're not solving every problem, but that it forces the community to engage in adaptation of homes, et cetera. But it's what you were speaking about is this sort of interlocking sort of systemic understanding, so that if one aspect of a system fails, there's not complete catastrophic failure, but you're sort of more resilient. Yeah. There are some questions down the front here, if people with the microphones could bring,
Whoops. My name's Gabby. I'm from the University of Rhode Island. I'm a student. I actually have a question about basically how we get the public more involved in this, only because we do projects consistently in these small towns, and you mentioned all the challenges that you guys go through as far as getting permissions and things like that, but we run into problems where the public doesn't want to they don't want change, so they want to keep the history within the town, but in order to accommodate for the sea level rising projections and things like that, we have to really go in and change these things. But how do we get them more involved to know that this is something that they need to do, and that we have to basically create new histories for them?
I would go to the places where there's already leadership and understanding. If we want to demonstrate how communities self-determine and lead their own change process in a strong way, we probably shouldn't go to the hardest places first. And that is partly why we went to Hunts Point, because there was no education to be done except of us. And you could use design to give shape and to an integrated community aspiration, but I think we need some good examples of institutions for planning at scales of community and for successes, so that it becomes something that people understand that is possible. So I would say cherry pick and go to places where the capacity is already there and the need, and then partner and develop some good examples.
Yeah, I would add to that I think community engagement is something that's has a long history, and this current stage of effort is not necessarily a new effort. It's something that builds on our tradition of community engagement. And I think real community engagement, getting down at the level where you're getting feedback and you have a dialogue where you can catch the concerns of the community before they get blasted to the New York Times or other venues is critical, and it really means boots on the ground, spending time and getting immersed and having a level of commitment to that community that your intentions are heartfelt and meaningful. So it takes time and effort. It's not a simple task.
I would also just add that visualization is a big part of that, and creativity. Much of what we did was also piggyback on existing community events. Like one was a festival on the shoreline, and we just sort of had a booth and so on. So, find people where they are in that sense and integrate these topics into the equation. Mm-hmm. How are we doing for time? We have 3 more minutes, so sorry, maybe one more question? I don't know. Okay, you tell me, just someone.
Hi, Catherine Mashansky from 100 Resilient Cities. I was looking at, I think, an older version of the agenda, and I noticed it was called, I think, Natural and Man-Made Risks, and now it's risk and infrastructural ecology. And I guess my comment rather than question is just, we don't ever, I think, in any of the planning processes that I've done post-Sandy, talk enough about social and economic risk, because it's really hard. And so we just sort of skip over it. I mean, for NDRC, for New York Rising, we never brought in enough folks who worked in the community, understood sort of like economy at the local level or social systems at the local level. And so just if this is going to be a curriculum for design students, it would be great to just think about how to do that in a better way. Maybe do you agree is the question?
Yeah. One of our core courses is community and resilience, and it's the intersection of the infrastructural methodologies for redundancy and trying to ensure resilience, along with an analysis of how a community works. And a lot of that comes from experiences in Red Hook in Brooklyn, where we've been kind of the guinea pig community for a lot of Sandy stuff. And frankly, there's even community meeting fatigue. So for me, the boots on the ground is necessary, but Kate's idea of visualizing, seeing is believing if you're a layperson, and developing those tools that can bring a layperson up to the level of an expert. And so you're in the same room when you're coming up with solutions together, so you have buy-in. And I think that the teaching methods of doing that, having students actually see the reaction of people that they talk to, be involved in real-world projects, but that I keep coming back to bridging the technology with the sociology and making it seamless.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I believe we have Amy, we have a small break, but we have a lunchtime keynote lecture, so please just stretch your legs. And Amy's going to make an announcement, I think. So don't move.
So thank you, panelists, for